Hello, and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Jo Wheatley, and my friend and co host, Zoe Hawkins.
Hi, everybody. We're here today to talk to you about coaching and HR for lots of reasons, really. Joe and I originally were in human resources roles ourselves, and we, as you know, transitioned into a career of coaching. And we see many people across all of our programs coming from different fields of HR, such as learning and development or OD, consultancy, all kinds of different things. And we've never actually done a podcast specifically talking about the role of HR and the intersection between that and coaching and different career opportunities. So we thought coaching and HR was a great podcast title, and here we are. So where should we begin, Joe?
I think we were talking beforehand about in our own experience and the conversations that we have. Often those in HR roles are called upon to facilitate group and teamwork in an organization, to support them to have conversations that might be challenging or to help them develop. And they're often asked to do that because they're seen to be talented at working with people. So therefore, you would be good at facilitating a group or team experience. Now, we know, and you'll know from other podcasts you've listened to, actually, it can be very complicated. And people in HR roles can find those requests or demands to do that work quite intimidating. It might not be something that they feel comfortable to do. And it is a distinct skill set, although obviously there are natural skills and talents that many people in HR have that do lend themselves to being able to grow and develop in that way.
It's funny, isn't it, that request on HR, because HR wears so many hats. You know, one minute they could be in a disciplinary with somebody, like for whatever role they're playing there, and the next they might be sitting in a performance review meeting. They might be supporting somebody with a career development plan. They might be doing some workforce planning, and then the same person gets called upon to support with engagement within the team. And like, think of all the different opinions that people may hold of the function of HR or the role that you're inhabiting. So, you know, it's understandable that in that request you may feel nervous or you may feel uncertain. You may equally be really excited and feel well equipped to do it. And it's got, sort of, as we're talking about this, if you want to get access to our free introductory lesson on group and team coaching, you can access that at a website, which is igcompany.co.uk/GTC now. And I think it's a perfect place for HR people to just dip their toe in and start to explore, well, if I was to gain some more expertise, skills, training around this, what would that look like and what would that mean? So that's available for you if you're in HR, and to anybody at the moment if you want to go and take a look at that over there. And so the thing I think around HR that I reflect on back from my career is I always had my favorite bits of the role. So I loved all the interactions that I would get with the employees when they would come and they would want to talk to me about their career development or their plans for the future, or you know, how they could better themselves. I would love those conversations, and I would love the conversations with the line managers around, like, how can I improve the morale and the engagement of my team? And what you start to notice in the role of HR is you're already doing a huge amount of coaching, you know, and there's mentoring involved in that as well, of course, and advising and all of that. But the skills of somebody in an HR role are so well matched to the different aspects of coaching, whether that is one-to-one or, as we've just talked about, in groups and in teams.
Yeah, and what does that look like? Listening well. It sounds so simple, but lots of people find that difficult, or it's not a natural thing, and they want to immediately jump to solutions. And when you think about developing people, sometimes it starts with helping them to identify solutions. So offering suggestions and helping them to understand the context and the bigger picture and what are the factors that you would take into account. But if somebody's further along in their role, it might be listening well, asking the odd question that helps them to access what they do in fact already know. So I think what we often would see in those roles is that people did have the knowledge and the expertise, but maybe they lacked a bit of experience, and attached to that was a lack of confidence. And so there's a big confidence growing piece. And I remember the ongoing debates around the big conversations in organizations, and should it be HR that does that, or should it be the manager that does that? And I think back when we were in those roles, it would kind of depend on the expertise of the individuals, actually, rather than, necessarily a particular policy piece. So from a coaching skills perspective, naturally, listening skills, um, helping people to reflect on yourself, being able to reflect in the moment, after the moment. Um, I think it's also about energy management, being able to create a safe space for somebody to be able to talk and explore things, which is more than listening. It's being really conscious and intentional about the way that you engage with people.
I remember in my early HR careers, I used to do a lot of supporting with recruitment, and I always used to get the job to phone the unsuccessful candidates and tell them that they hadn't got the job. And honestly, I used to hate it. Like, I used to be racked with nerves around making these calls. But when I made those calls, I'd often get into a discussion around the feedback and, how might they do it differently next time. And people always used to leave like, oh, thank you so much. Like, it was such a valuable conversation. And of course, what I was doing there was coaching. And I didn't know it at the time. I didn't really know what coaching was. This is probably back in my 20s. And I think at the time, really what was happening is my line managers or the recruiting managers didn't want to do that themselves because it wasn't a very nice part of the role. And so it used to get handed to me in HR. And I think there's two things that with coaching skills that I have today that I would do differently. One would be to engage in a conversation with the recruiting manager around whose role is it, and where could this be most valuable? Because I wasn't necessarily always present in those interviews either. So I was kind of working with third hand feedback. But then if I was to have the conversation, what are some of the things that were the strengths of the person that I could pass on? I would almost coach the manager to give me more to work with so that conversations I had would be even more effective. So I think there's so many different places within the role of HR, which is such a broad role, isn't it? That coaching naturally sits and just becomes really, really valuable. Well-being, of course, being one of those as well. You know, you seem to be the beacon of well-being in an organization. And of course, HR can be an independent well-being role. Or it can have an element of well-being to it. And what that does is it means that people will be coming to you when perhaps they are at their lowest in terms of their employment, and bringing things that may be happening in their life or things that are happening in work, or dissatisfaction with perhaps it's another member of the team, or it might be their line manager themselves, and that puts a real demand, I think, on you as a person to be able to hold space and have those conversations. And I think it's a special skill to be able to, as you said, Joe, create those safe spaces. And I think it's a privilege when people do approach you to be able to have those conversations.
And on the flip side of that, I think when you and I, we've talked about this before in the podcast, but when we were in our HR roles, I think we were seeking some support for ourselves because the roles are demanding. I mean, being a manager is demanding, but there's just looking at HR, it can be a really, really demanding role emotionally. And that can take a toll, particularly during intense periods of change in organizations. It's not just one manager that is drawing on you, but maybe all of them. And then you might be part of the senior management team or the senior leadership team, and there may be really difficult decisions that are being made there, and you're part of that. You're often privy to information before managers that you're supporting. There's a lot of psychological dynamics, and your values are tested every single day, I think, in that role. So when we trained as coaches, it was because we recognized that we had talents as we learned about coaching through the role of HR. We're like, oh, maybe we could be a good coach. But also it was because we wanted to get the benefits of coaching. So when you train as a coach and you're going to get coached whilst other people are practicing, and whilst you're practicing as well, that seemed like a no-brainer, because all of our needs would be fulfilled there, that desire to learn, and also that well-being aspect too, and developing deep and meaningful relationships. I think a lot of people in HR seek that. Like we seek meaning, we seek those safe relationships ourselves. And when you do a coaching program, you meet people that are like-minded, often have similar values. And lots of people in HR work in standalone roles. And those roles can be really lonely at times. And so being able to find a group of people that can be a source of support or understanding, or even just a breath of fresh air, or feel actually much more aligned to you, maybe, than you feel aligned to perhaps the context or the situation that you're in at that time. So coaching, doing a coaching course, not only is a natural career progression for many people in HR because of the natural underlying talents and qualities that you may have, but also because of that. And of course, you might be a commissioner of coaching. That is kind of how I came across coaching. And then I commissioned a coach to come into the organization, and in getting to know them, I just started to really love the idea or see a possibility for a different future for me, which began this whole process of where we are, where I am today, where we are today. And so if you are being asked to commission bringing coaches into your organization, or to start to develop or continue to develop a coaching culture, and thinking, well, what does that involve? I want to get to know about this. And if you're commissioning training for coaching training for certain parts of your organization, it would be a good idea to be trained at probably the level above that, or at that very highest level, so that when you are commissioning coach training organizations, you really understand the questions to ask and how to get the best people into work with your organization.
When I reflect back on my HR career, I can see patterns of behavior that weren't necessarily how I would do it today. So I can think about times when I would collude with the particular department, perhaps, that I was working with. And it might have been around, I don't know, when we used to have like high potential meetings. So you're talking about the talent within the team. And, some people would get particularly excited about a particular talent that was coming through the organization. And I can remember, like, I would get swept up in some of that energy, to a point where I probably wasn't representing some of those who were quieter, maybe, who presented their talent in a different way. And then there would be others where I could get quite challenging. If there was like a restructure that was taking place, I would sort of try and toe the legal line and be like, no, that you can't do it this way. You need to do it that way. And I think what my coaching training enabled me to do was really round my edges and really soften my ability to be able to reflect in the moment on those relationships and what was and wasn't happening. And so, when we talk about coaching and HR, it's not necessarily that all coaches want to become a coach, but the skill, you are a coach anyway. Like, that's, I think, what we're saying is, like, when you're in HR, you are already in the role of a coach by the nature of the role. And so the coaching training, gaining skills, whether it's as a one-to-one coach or working with groups and teams or in some other fashion, really helps you to become excellent at your role. And I think people in HR want to be excellent at their role. I think that it's the same for many careers, right? But I think particularly in this profession, you come into it almost vocationally, like a desire to make a difference, a desire to have an impact, a desire to work in an amazing organization, create a wonderful culture where people are performing at a high level and you're contributing in so many different ways. And learning coaching skills, I think, just really enhances everything that you do already. It's not always about something else. And it is true that for many people in HR, there is an exit strategy, be it a retirement plan or a when I have a family plan, or, when I've reached a certain level plan. There is often an exit strategy and a desire to, at some point, move out of corporate life into whether it be an independent HR consultancy or some other role that brings perhaps more freedom.
My reflections are also that coaching training can help to depersonalize some of the experiences that you have in the HR role that can start to feel personal. So as you were describing, whether you're having to defend a legal kind of red line that exists, that even if you don't agree with it, but it's there, or you know, a manager disagrees with the approach that you're recommending that is taken, drawing on your experience, it can be easy to take things personally. And I think another thing that happens is drawing on that kind of search for deep meaning and so on that people that are often drawn to the profession have, is we can start to focus more on the ideal, the perfect, and be have this like never ending strive for that. And managers can find that jarring. And I think when you do coaching training, it can help you, like describing, rounding off the edges, and it can also bring that awareness as to what are the watch outs for me personally as an individual when thinking about yourself as an individual, and how your your relational development with other people, the patterns that might exist in the way that you are as an individual, and give you an opportunity to reflect on where you are now and who you are now and where you're going and how you want to be. Um and I think that process can be difficult and challenging, and it can be really beautiful and liberating and expanding too, and expansive. It can help you to break out of, a box that you might have found yourself feeling that you have gotten into. And for us, we're so grateful for our HR careers. Like, it brought deep meaning for me. I'm really proud of the work that I did when I worked in HR. And when I talk about that, it's like, I think it's about, I don't know how many years, maybe 7 years, 10 years, 12 years, something like that. I can't quite remember. So across a number of different organizations. So, you and I have got a real chunk of our careers. Our careers are like, have been, I guess, less than half now, actually. We've kind of tipped over into, we've been coaching for longer than we've been doing anything else. But I think anybody that worked with me during that period of time would talk about, like, knowing what I've gone on to do, would have probably seen that in some way, would have seen that coaching was a natural pathway and transition into it. So it absolutely was the foundations of discovering the coach in me.
Mm. I don't know if people would say the same about me, that they would have seen coaching as the route. I look back, I mean, we were young, right? Many of my earlier career years were spent in HR. And the beauty of the coaching journey is you learn all the time. You learn about yourself, you develop different skills. Like, I look back on some of the trickier relationships that I may have had. I had a high need for freedom. So with some line managers, I'd butt up against them, and then others I'd get on really well with. And, I look back at the younger version of myself, and like, sometimes I didn't navigate those very well. But that's the beauty of the learning journey, isn't it? Is that the person who sits here today is not the person who I was back then. I sit here with the vast knowledge, skills, experience, and life experience of being able to be on this coaching journey for a long time. It's not to say I wasn't good at what I did and I wasn't a good person. I'm just saying, actually, people grow and people evolve and people change. And I think that coaching accelerates that, actually. I think it takes growth to a whole new level,
Mm.
and opens up so many more doorways and opportunities. So, I think I think people in HR are lifelong learners. I remember at the end of every performance review, it's like, right, let's talk about your development. Like, what would you like to do? And it was always personal development related stuff. And I think when you're in a commercial role, it's often like, I want to go and be a better negotiator, or I want to learn different sales techniques. And those are valid and they're great. But in HR, you have this beautiful opportunity where personal development and like professional growth is really encouraged. And so I think developing as a coach is almost like a natural step.
It can be natural. And I think there's also a rebellious quality about it. And I know, freedom is really important to you. And that word it isn't a word that is I relate to as much, but I there is a little rebellious streak in me, and I think part of what I love about coaching is it feeds a little bit of that. So I could have carried on and followed, a particular pathway, and I chose not to. I chose to break out of that and find my own thing. And it's an expression of creativity. And because HR is some roles in HR or a lot of roles in HR are quite compliance led, which yes, I can do. And there is a part of my personality that absolutely speaks to. And there is another part of my personality that it doesn't. And I need both basically in what I do. So if you're listening and you're in HR, there might be a little bit of that for you, maybe that sparks off in you, and I think it's important to acknowledge. I think I have way more fun in my coaching career than I ever had in my HR career, which isn't something I necessarily would consciously have looked for in my career pathway. But I notice that I'm smiling as I'm thinking
Mm.
about that. So, and nowadays most people have a number of different careers. That has become the norm. So there are options out there for you. And if you feel called to do something with us around coaching, whether it's a foundational coaching program, well, all the way up to master's level if you want to, if you like us, or it's more of the CPD side. So perhaps you are being asked to do work with groups and teams and you didn't even know where to start to look for some support in that. You'd be welcome to come and join our group and team coaching program. As Zoe said, come and take a look at the content and see if it speaks to what you need. We've also got our emotions coaching practitioner training, which speaks to the emotional roller coaster that you can have in a HR role. And if you're supporting individuals and managers or leaders that themselves are neurodivergent or are really wanting to do more, do better in supporting and being allies for their neurodivergent team members and colleagues, you might be interested to get ahead of the curve and come and join our neurodivergent inclusive coaching program. So much for you to splash around in and expand in. And you can find out about those programs on our website, igcompany.co.uk.